everybody, this is Olivia over at Red Stick Catholics for the Diocese of Baton Rouge. And we're coming at you today with Formation Friday. That's right, it's happening yet again. Join me by the riverside and a nice lovely fire because we're going to talk about discernment. Joe and I had actually done a couple of videos on discernment a few months ago where we talked about just giving the male and female perspectives for discernment, what that looks like, how it's the same, how it's different for both men and women. So I guess today we're going to talk about part 3 of discernment, or I guess just another facet of it, because it really is something that's kind of inexhaustible, but it's always good to talk about. And so first I really just want to talk about what discernment is, right? It's a big $5 word. People say, that they're discerning something, or that you should discern something, or they're in discernment, and that can be really overwhelming. It can seem really conceptual, and it can be hard to kind of get your mind around that. So when we're talking about discernment, remember that we're not just talking about the big D discernments. Like, these are the life-changing, pivotal moments at a crossroads kinds of things. They can be, but it's not always. And in fact, discernment is a daily exercise. We know that. So I was thinking about a really helpful definition that I read of discernment a while back. And it's an observation that provides interior guidance to those who live in the Lord's presence. And I think the really pivotal part of that definition is the fact of living in the Lord's presence. Because when we're in a relationship with someone, which is what it is to be in their presence constantly, when we're in a relationship with someone, you know them. You know the sound of their voice, you know what they smell like, you know what their footsteps sound like, you know their movements, you know what their body language is telling you. All of those things you can discern what they're trying to tell you, even before they open their mouth, right? And so when we're in a relationship with God, which happens through what? Through prayer. So when we're in that relationship with God, we still do those things, And so I heard a priest say once that that discernment is being able to sniff out God. But it presumes, right, that you already know him, that you already know his smell. And so being able to sniff out God in your life is kind of what discernment is. But the question I want to talk about today, I want to dive deeper into that question by asking another question, which is, in your discernment, are you motivated by fear, or are you motivated by love? And I think that can be the biggest hurdle to overcome when someone is starting to discern something. It's just, what is your motivation for it? Are you motivated by fear? And what does that look like? Because there's lots of different types of fear that we could have about something, I could be afraid that I disappoint people if I do it or if I don't do it. I can be afraid that I'm never going to be able to take it back, that this is going to be a permanent decision. You can call it a fear of permanence, right? I could be afraid that I'm going to miss out on something. I could have FOMO, so I pick this one thing, but then that means I'm going to miss out on something else. Because necessarily, you say yes to one thing, it means a no to any other thing. So I could be afraid that I'm missing out on something, or even afraid that if I pick this one path, that I might, I'm going to be on this path, and that means I'm not going to be on these other paths, and what if I'm supposed to be on those other paths? And so it just leads to this anxiety tornado. I could also be afraid of how difficult it is. Maybe it's something that I know is going to be really challenging, and I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of what I will look like in that. Sometimes you can be afraid of thoughts of unworthiness. I'm not worthy of this thing that God wants for me, or that it seems that God wants for me, and so I'm gonna walk away from it because I'm afraid that this other person or that this situation will reveal an unworthiness inside of me. And I think that there can also be even a fear of just the enormity of something. So, there's always a leap when you go into the discernment of a thing, and you're necessarily not going to have all the information that you would feel comfortable, that you would need to have to feel comfortable making that decision. But at a certain point, you have to take that leap. You have to have gathered, do your due diligence, have all the information that you reasonably can. And then you got to make a decision, and that decision is going to involve a leap of faith. So that's what fear looks like. So let's switch it and let's talk about love. What does it look like to discern something out of love? To be motivated out of love. And I think about what Saint Giannamola said, right? Whatever God wants. So Saint Giannamola said, "Whatever God wants." It's a very short little quote, but it packs a punch. Whatever God wants. And that's really at the root of love, right? Love is willing the good of the other, to the point of self-sacrifice. So if I love God, then I want what He wants, and I want what He wants for me, because I know that He loves me infinitely more than I could ever love myself. So whatever God wants, but also being able to discern what are my own desires. What are the things that I'm attracted to? What are the things that I'm not attracted to? Also important. And then just being real with, like, all right, what do I feel drawn towards? What do I feel compelled towards? And always do those things in prayer, because there's such a thing as unholy desire. But realize that if you have talents, if you have gifts, if you have a desire that rests in a certain area, and you also can recognize that there's a need in that area that you might be able to meet, that's a pretty good indication that that's a direction worth walking in. But you always do it in prayer, you always do it in community, and preferably with some kind of spiritual director or someone that you trust. Never do it alone. So you listen to your desires, listen to them in prayer, and realize that God gave you those desires, those holy desires to fulfill His will, and that the creative capacity to do that in a way that's uniquely you. So, yeah. Okay, so I kind of just talked about, also look at where are the places where my gifts meet a certain need that I can identify. Which is not to say that any need that you perceive is yours alone to fix, but it's a good place to start when figuring out what I'm supposed to do with this certain issue. Sometimes being motivated by love involves choosing between goods. You have 2 things, or maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 things that are all good in themselves, and I have to choose. And it's not a matter of one is better than the other. I mean, maybe it is, but it's not always the case. Sometimes it's just a matter of circumstances. Sometimes it's a matter of timing. So this one good may be good for me, but not right now, whereas this other good is good for me right now. And I think it's also important, going back to what we were talking about earlier about a personal relationship, and being able to sniff out the Lord, His presence in your life. When we're thinking about being motivated by love, I think it comes down to, all right, let me be real about how I understand the Lord. All right, let me be real about how the Lord has shown up in my life so far. Because there's a way that He talks to you that's different than how He talks to anybody else, because it's a relationship with you. And so, look at your life. Look at those moments where you feel the Lord has really shown up, where the Lord has really been clear, where He's really spoken to you, whatever the case may be, and sit with those things, pray with those things. What's unique about those moments in your life? How did He come? How did He make those things clear to you? Because those can sometimes be indications of how He'll show up later in your life. And then finally, for being motivated by love, what are those things that generate life in you for others, right? Because no good can ever be isolated unto myself. Any good is going to be life-giving. It's going to be generative. So when you're thinking about, how am I going to discern something out of love? Think about, for whom am I intended? For whom am I created? For whom am I meant to serve in this moment, today, and in life? But remember, discernment is something it's global, but it's also local in the span of your life. So, whose am I today? Might be a good question to start your day with. And I'm motivated because today is also the Feast of Sts. Peter and Paul. And in the Office of Reading, St. Augustine was talking about being able to loose through love the things that we'd bound through fear, which is perfect, because that's what we're talking about. So love is going to be the thing that undoes those knots that we create out of fear and anxiety. those things that ultimately can tie us to the present moment, can tie us to the past, which is much worse. Because fear is that thing that can tie us down, can keep us from moving forward in a way that's healthy, in a way that's generative, in a way that's life-giving. And when we're freed from that fear, it happens through love. And that love comes through the grace of God. It comes through prayer. It comes through relationship with Him. And that's how we're going to truly become more of who we are meant to be, more of who we are created to be.